Tomato Adventure. Tomato Adobenchā is a role-playing video game RPG developed by AlphaDream and published by Nintendo in Japan for the Game Boy Advance on January 25, 2002. Gameplay. Players controlled a mill through the Ketchup Kingdom while talking to people, entering places and collecting items. The object of the game is to save DeMille's girlfriend, Catherine, and the Ketchup Kingdom from King Abira by going through every village to obtain the missing parts of a robot that can give anyone access into the Gimmick Palace, a tower-like structure with the tomato on it. Instead of wandering endlessly inside places or entering battles randomly, Tomato Adventure displays enemies moving around on the screen while entering battles by bumping DeMille into them. Battle system. During battles against enemies, the player must fight using toy-like weapons called gimmicks, which require the player to play a mini-game correctly in order to land direct hits on the enemies, depending on which gimmick the player uses. While using gimmicks correctly, the player will earn stars for the extreme attacks. But if the player increases the difficulty of the gimmicks, the player will increase the attack points of the gimmicks and earn more stars. While the mini-games would be more difficult than before, when one or two gears light up above the gimmick meter, the player now has the choice to use one of two extreme attacks. If the player has a partner joined in. If the player fails in any mini-game, the gimmick meter will drop down to 0, and the player will have to start it all over. There are 4 different types of gimmicks. There are 4 types of gimmicks. Time. This type makes you finish a mini-game that requires timing, like pressing a button whenever something comes to a certain part. Speed. This type makes you finish a mini-game that requires you to finish a task correctly before time runs out. Excite. Or Doki Doki. This type makes you finish miscellaneous mini-games. Input. This type makes you finish a mini-game that either requires you to repeatedly hit the proper button, S, or to insert the information in a certain order or amount of times. Gimmicker. Gimmicker is a special card game that can only be available when the player talks to a card-like character named Gimmick-a-Mania at the stadium in Oi's town after the player defeats the third Super Kid. However, there are also some other characters that the player can either duel with or receive a new Gimmicker card from. The object of this card game is to make the opponent have less HP than the player's HP, or drop it to 0. There are 2 kinds of cards. Gimmick cards. These cards are based on the real gimmicks. They are used for both players to attack each other with them. Character cards. These cards do certain things depending on who is on the card. The earliest character cards are 2 cards that would increase or decrease your gimmick cards attack points. 2 cards that would move your gimmick card up or down 1 color rank. 2 cards that would increase or decrease the attack points of your opponent's gimmick cards. And 1 card that would increase your HP by 25. Player must put his/her gimmick cards at a higher color rank than his/her opponents. However, green beats blue. If both players have their gimmick cards on the same color rank, the player who has more attack points in his/her gimmick card will attack the opponent. If both gimmick cards' attack points are equal, it becomes a draw. If the player's opponent is at a higher rank, the player must either make his/her gimmick card's attack points the same, or nearly the same, as the opponent's in order to receive a small amount of damage, or move their gimmick cards up to the same color rank as the opponent's gimmick cards. You can also play Gimmicker with Saramo if your rank on the Lard Colosseum is level 2. At level 3, you must play against Enoken. To rank up, play and see the stars at the top side. Talk to him to see how many starts you gotten. Plot. The story takes place in a land ruled by and intended for young characters, the Ketchup Kingdom, which is also filled with devices like Jack-in-the-Boxes. The protagonist is a hair-light boy in blue clothing named Emil, who lives in a school bus with no wheels in a village on the outskirts of the Ketchup Kingdom, called Cobor Village. Emil is an outcast because he dislikes tomatoes. As a result, he and other kids in Cobora who dislike tomatoes are looked down upon as droppers, banished for heresy, and locked up in Cobor Village until they change their attitudes towards tomatoes. While watching television, Emil sees that the main antagonist, King Abira, is celebrating a holiday called Tomato Day, while showing his project he created called the Super Kurakuka, a laser-like gun that transforms people, places, and things into dolls, toys, and playgrounds. After Emil's television set gets severely damaged, he visits his neighbor and friend Saramo and asks him if he could fix his television set. Saramo says he will and gives Emil his first gimmick, called the Gear Yo-Yo. After Saramo teaches Emil how to use it, Emil's girlfriend Pathryn comes to tell him that she wanted him and her to venture into the dangerous toy ruins to look for her fantastic toy, the gimmick Robo. But by the time they arrive, it is absent. Then, two purple creatures with zippers on them, Bricky and Gricky, capture Pathryn with a hook. Emil grabs onto her while being pulled up to the airship, the Karen No. 2, piloted by Bricky and Gricky. As soon as Emil and Pathryn come aboard the airship, Bricky and Gricky receive a call from King Abira to bring Pathryn to the palace and drop Emil out of the airship. After Emil fights Bricky and Gricky, they drop Emil from the airship into the tomato pond, only for him to notice that he is standing near King Abira's home, the Gimmick Palace, a tall, red tower with a tomato-shaped top. When he decides to enter and save Pathryn, he encounters a wall that he cannot pass through. Then, a mole named Rireku tells him that in order to pass through the wall, Emil has to defeat the 6 super kids and obtain the 6 key items called toy parts. While Emil goes on his adventure, he befriends some people for them to join forces with him to defeat King Abira and save Pathryn and the entire Ketchup Kingdom. His partners in order of joining him are Aretha, Sophie B, and Rireku. Development. After AlphaDream developed and released their first video game title, Koto Battle Tengai no Moribito, Nintendo wanted AlphaDream's permission to develop an entirely new role-playing video game with them, titled Gimmick Land, Gimmiku Rando. They got the name from an idea of a game structure that utilizes gimmicky, toy-like controls that make it an RPG with action elements. It was finished and almost ready to be released for the Game Boy Color in Japan, until Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance to make the Game Boy Color obsolete. After noticing that, Nintendo requested AlphaDream to redevelop and rename Gimmick Land as Tomato Adventure for the Game Boy Advance. Nintendo also requested AlphaDream to add some easily recognizable characters in which reflects the new title, so that the game would have a more marketable image. Those were Nintendo's largest requests. Other changes are the quality of the graphics and audio being enhanced. Only 2 screenshots of Gimmick Land were released to the public by the developers. On the release date of Tomato Adventure, Nintendo and AlphaDream announced a contest where 20 winners won themselves 1 kilogram of sweet tomatoes from the Kochi Virtue Valley area. The contest ended on February 28, 2002. Reception. 1 UP. Com. A.